Hi there, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Cloud-Based Mayhem. Happy New Year, and welcome to 2022. Let's hope 2022 is a little kinder to all of us than the last couple years have been. But to kick off this new year, I've got a great show for you today that's, again, quite a bit different than stuff we've done in the past. I was on the Soaring the Sky podcast recently, and they had me on as a guest, which is dedicated to glider pilots, sailplane pilots. And one of the guests that had been on their show reached out to me, Clemens Ceipek. He lives down in the Boulder, Denver area now and flies there, but he's an Austrian sailplane pilot and fascinating individual. And he got into sailplanes a long time ago and then went away from it for also, again, a long time, and then came back to it about 4 years ago. And he's got a blog and video series and has just really chased it hard and, really figured a lot of things out. So he's been listening to this podcast lately and reached out and was pretty fascinated with the various differences and similarities between the two ways of aviation. So we talk about risk tolerance and weather and finding lines and just all the differences. I haven't flown in a sailplane. I'd love to, and I need to. But we just kind of dug into both of each other's worlds and really enjoyed it. And I've needed to get a lot more sailplane pilots on the show. So here you go. Enjoy this talk with Clemens Ceipek. Clemens, welcome to the Mayhem. I'm excited to have this conversation with you. We kind of got connected through Chuck Fulton's show, Soaring the Sky. I did a podcast with him recently, and he recommended we have a chat about flying sailplanes. And I think you heard that show, and you caught a few things that may have been not exactly true, because I don't know anything about flying sailplanes. So, and I've always wanted to, and I've always been super fascinated with them because I fly with next to and very briefly next to sailplanes in the Alps all the time. It's super popular over there. We don't see them much in my part of the world, but King Mountain's a big site here, and they have a fly-in. They used to have a fly-in every year. I'm not sure if they still do, but anyway, welcome to the show, and I'm excited to talk to you.
Yeah, well, thanks, Gavin, for having me. This is it's super exciting. I also just got hooked up with the show through Chuck. I actually wasn't even aware. This is how much we fly in the sky together with paragliders and sailplanes all the time. But we still typically don't talk to each other very much. And I've listened to a few of your episodes, and it's super exciting. And I'm like, yeah, this is really cool stuff. And so I'm gonna be a fan of your show for sure. And I'm super excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I've always just, I think we're going to delve into, your progression and what you've learned flying sailplanes. And, we've emailed back and forth a little bit about, it seems like the difference about 5x, in terms of distance covered and speed and all that, which sounds about right. But you don't, let's start here. I believe you're sitting in Boulder, Colorado, my alma mater, but you don't sound like you're from the States. What's your history?
Yeah, no, I'm originally from Austria, so that's where I grew up, and I actually learned to fly gliders in Austria. Did my license when I was 16. Flew probably for about 5 years at the time, and then then a career got in the way, and a family, and global and stuff, and I had to move to places where you don't really fly gliders, like London and Paris, and Minnesota is not a super great place to fly gliders either. So and then I was in Ohio for a while, so it's just didn't work for a while. But then I'm like, reached a point in my life where I'm like, this is what I wanted to do all the time, and I'm gonna go back to it. And this time I'm gonna do it really, and I'm doing it seriously. I'm putting a lot of time into it. I learned, it's almost like a full-time job now for me, because I'm also club president here in Boulder. So I'm super super into it. Bought my own plane a few years ago, And I've been doing some really cool flights and progressed pretty quickly. I also put up a YouTube channel,
Mm.
chasing the air.
I saw that. It's really some terrific content there.
Yeah, I mean it's very technical content. It's really for glider pilots. It doesn't really meet the entertainment need as much as for the general public. I haven't figured that out yet, but I've used all my writings and videos to progress myself, quite frankly. So I used it to learn, and I learned so much from going back and analyzing my flights, and especially when I fly with we have bunch of national champions, world champion contenders out here in Boulder. And if we fly together, and I will go back and look at what exactly were the differences, what did they do better than I did, and where did I actually make the better decisions, and it really helped me tremendously to progress very quickly. So I mean, I'm now flying nationals, and it's been a lot of learning in a very short period of time, and I think at this point it's super exciting. I'm also finding that a lot of people now look at this and say, yeah, that's I really like that. I wanna do that too.
To take me through the kind of steps of progression with sailplanes. The when you start and you start learning, it just is
Yeah,
again,
sure. I
I'm
mean,
pretty
I mean the
clueless
the
when it comes
learning,
to
yeah, it's quite interesting because what you're being taught, and I don't know if that's the same for paragliding, but what you're being taught in gliding is basically just to take off and land safely.
okay.
That's really what you're taught. It's like it's you're to get your license, and I mean it usually takes. It can take if you go to a school and you want to do it really intensely. It takes about 2 weeks to get it done. But for the most part, if people do it in a club environment, it's several months, and all they learn in that period is really taking off and landing. They have learned nothing about soaring.
Oh, okay.
So to get your license, I mean, yeah, sometimes you might have flown in a thermal with an instructor, and the instructor might have told you, "Oh, this was a thermal," but it's you haven't really learned anything. So you get your license, and you're a pilot, and you haven't really learned anything other than you can control your plane, and you can operate in an airport environment. You know how to use your radio and your instruments, and how you have your lessons in stall prevention, and pattern altitude, and operating in an airport environment. Those are the things to operate safely. That's what you've learned, but you haven't learned soaring.
So
and
it
and
sounds
so
like is that initial instruction, we would call that our P2. You're getting your
uh-huh.
novice license where you can fly without an instructor. Is when you do that in the sailplane world, is it quite similar to learning how to fly a small airplane? Because we don't get as much of the airspace training because we're not dealing with it as much. We deal with it, of course, especially if you're in Germany or you're in the flatlands in Europe. You've got to, airspace is a big thing when you start flying cross country. But it sounds like it's kind of a lot of theory and
The theory, yeah, there is a lot of theory, and the theory is very similar to the airplane theory. So, in fact,
yeah.
you learn a lot of things that you have to do in the US in particular, much more so than in Europe. In the US, you have to learn all the rules that affect airplanes, even though you will never come across some of those rules.
Oh,
Like how do you stop short at the runway line? How do I stop short, right, and wait for takeoff? I mean, it just doesn't happen. So you learn a lot of stupid things that actually never have any material application in your real soaring. But the real learning, honestly, the real learning only starts once you're done with the license, and then you're basically on your own unless you have mentors or coaches or friends who help you along the way.
I
There is
see
no
that.
formal there's no formal progression from there, other than there's you're encouraged to do some badges, and there's some recognition around it,
Yeah.
but there's no more teaching, no formalized teaching around it. So you're basically on your own, and so we lose a lot of people in the sport after they have done their basic license because they don't know how to progress from there.
God, I could be
That
talking to a paragliding instructor right now. You just said exactly what I hear from all the instructors. I mean, we call that, the whole nest thing. You just, they get just enough information to get out of the nest, but you don't really teach them that much about going somewhere. It's
That's exactly right. That's
really,
exactly
there's
right.
the
Yeah.
attrition rate in our sport is massive because of that. That's the theory anyway, is because you just,
Right.
you're kicking somebody out when they know just enough to be really dangerous.
Yeah, and I'm passionate enough that I don't want that to happen, right? So I think that's part of what my own personal interest is helping people not to get stuck in that phase, and actually helping them jump over that hoop. And we've created a lot of good content, and we're really at Boulder. We're one of the top soaring clubs in the world. We have
Really?
Yeah, we are. It's in the
Whoa.
U.S. We're one of the top clubs, but then we compete. For example, we compete at a club level competition worldwide against. It's an online. You basically upload your flights, and there's a World Speed League where basically the way it's handled is that your flights get analyzed based on a 2.5 hour duration in the flight, where 6 legs will count towards your distance that you've flown within those 2.5 hours, and the average speed that you achieved over that distance will count towards your league score. And the way it's scored at the club level is that on I think it's like 19 consecutive weekends during the season, flights on weekends will count towards the league score, and the top three scores from each club, from different pilots each weekend, will count towards the club score. And we were number 3 this year worldwide out of 1,000 some soaring clubs, and last year we were number 2. So
Whoa.
we're among the top soaring clubs in the world.
That blows me away. I had
Yeah, and
no idea it was that strong in the US. That's amazing.
well, it's not the U.S. isn't that strong in
It's
soaring.
just
It's
Boulder.
just we're very good. The Minden Soaring Club is exceptionally good. They were the number 1. So Minden, Nevada, and they fly in the Owens Valley, so they have amazing conditions, especially for that type of flying. Moriarty is pretty good down in New Mexico. And then there are some clubs on the East Coast, but the East Coast they basically have only ridge soaring conditions where they can go really big distances, where they have to fly 100 feet or 50 feet off the trees for like 6-7 hours at a time
Whoa.
at V&E basically. So these guys are
That sounds exciting.
it's a very intense way of flying, yeah. Versus
Whoa.
our flying is much more, it's much higher above the ground most of the time.
I've had this theory that the best in our sports, this guy Kriegel Maurer, and he's famous for not turning, and
Yeah, I
and
heard
he's
about
very
that. Yeah,
very often on the terrain and
yeah.
using little bits of lift coming out of the trees, and where I fly here in Sun Valley is very similar to the conditions you get in Boulder. We get really tall and we go on
Yeah.
these monster glides, and your glides would be just ridiculous here.
I've flown glides for 200 plus miles in one direction without making a turn.
Oh, stop it.
Not one turn.
Get out of here. Just no, no.
I mean, especially we have these amazing convergence conditions where we have the westerly winds is blowing over the continental divide of the Rocky Mountains, and we have thermals rising on the east side of the continental divide, and these thermals are pulling in air from the plains, and so you have got a ground level flow that is coming in from the plains, and you've got the wind coming over the continental divide, and where those two meet, that's where our convergence line sets up. And it's an amazing convergence line. You can go from the Wyoming border, you can go, past Pikes Peak, and you basically don't turn.
Wow. Is the bee's knees for you guys big FAI triangles? I mean, that's what that's the holy grail of paragliding is
Yeah,
big.
triangles are a big part of the sport because they're more complicated, right? Because you cannot just do yo-yos
Yeah.
around the convergence line. So for us, I love flying triangles because it's a real challenge, especially in our conditions. Because now if for us to fly a triangle out into the plains usually doesn't work, especially we've got this big Denver airspace that is sitting right next to us. So for us to fly a big triangle, we have to go far west from Boulder. So that basically means we have to cross multiple mountain ranges, especially if you want to fly like a 750 or so triangle. I mean, basically now you're in western Colorado. So you're taking off in Boulder, you fly maybe south towards Pikes Peak, and you're heading over towards Grand Junction. And so you're basically crossing multiple mountain ranges. And then on the way, then you have to go take to another triangle lake that goes more towards the Wyoming border. You have to cross all those mountain ranges back, but and they have different configurations, and and then you have to, still have the conditions to at the end of the day make it back home.
For
It's
you
a,
guys, is that, you're in serious 14er country there. For
oh
you
yeah,
guys, is that a little puckering? I mean, we can find places to land
we
a lot
we
easier than
love
you
this.
do.
We actually
You
have
do?
one of our biggest club things is what we call the 14er challenge, and it's a career challenge. So it's a career challenge for all Colorado pilots, or for anyone who wants. It's open to any glider pilot in the world who wants to come fly in Colorado. We have this. We call it the 14er challenge. You basically have to fly above all the 14ers over your soaring career, and you basically have to tag them all. And there's a sort of minimum distance around the peak. You have to basically be above each peak,
Wow.
and there's 58 of them. And so there's only 5 people so far who have completed it. I'm well on my way. I've got a few left. Those are the hardest ones that I've still got left, but it's in within 3 years I've gotten pretty high up there already. So, but that's one of the coolest challenges we have out here is fly over all the 14ers. It's super demanding and interesting.
Why can't you do the triangle out over the plains? Why can't you just run the east side of the mountains and then punch it out and come back? Is it just too much west wind?
No, it's not so much the way that the conditions over the plains, they tend not to be that good, quite frankly. I mean,
Really?
there are times when it's fine. Um, well, there's a practical consideration. So for us, particularly in Boulder, is we have this big Denver airspace, right? Class B airspace, and it's just pretty big. I mean, there are people who have flown around it, around the airspace, and that's one of the kind of interesting flights you can do from here. You can try and fly around the Denver airspace. Conditions aren't super good usually, and it's more wet, right? You got into the Platte river valleys, the North Platte, South Platte river valleys. Thermals don't tend to be as strong. They are not as reliable, though it gets more windy. Cloud bases tend not to be that high. The conditions over the mountains for us are usually way better than out in the plains.
Hmm, interesting. Let me get back to my question. When I was talking about Kriegel and gliding, so the he would say that we're flying really inefficiently here by we're turning too much. Half the time, when you're turning, half
Oh
the
yeah,
time you're
we
going the
don't
wrong
turn
way,
much. Yeah,
right? Yeah. Well, I know
yep,
you
yep.
don't, but I was just thinking about, when you're doing these 14, when you're doing the triangles up into the 14ers and stuff, for us, looking at a 20K or even a 20, we often have a 20-mile glide between one mountain range
Yeah,
and the next. When we're going towards Montana, we got to cross all these mountain
yeah,
ranges.
yeah.
And
It's a big
so,
deal.
we'll get real tall before we go across the flats for the same reason you just said, that the flats, in the middle of the day, you're going to find a climb somewhere across there, but they're not going to be, it's not as obvious and it's not as easy, and they're not going to be as strong as the mountains. So we'll spend some time getting super tall, get up close to class 1 and then, or class A, and then we'll go on glide and hope we get to the next, we hopefully make it to the range. Whereas I feel like, Kriegel hasn't flown over here, but I feel like if he was here, he would have more of an Alps approach where he would, only get as high as he barely needed and then kind of just work it on a really good line and
Hmm,
get,
hmm.
so I'm wondering if you've been able to, are you guys constantly trying to use more of the kind of the terrain, or you've got the glide where you just get tall and you stay tall?
We usually have the glide. In the Alps, it's different, and the conditions in the Alps are very different. So I've flown quite a bit in Austria too, in the Alps. And in the Alps, it's compared to the rock, it's very interesting. What I find is in the Alps, you have very, very reliable lift around along all of the spines.
Mm-hmm.
So you basically, as long as you stay right on top of the spine, you can usually go straight without having to turn. And here it's not that obvious because the cloud base is so high, and the thermal distance between the ground and the cloud base, there's so much space in between that there is a disconnect that develops between what's happening at ground level and what is happening at the cloud base level. And that's why I think Colorado in particular, it is not as easy, as obvious to go straight along the spines.
Mm.
But in part, it may also be that we're not doing it, number one, because we don't have to, because the clouds are so high. So we can, be up there, and it feels a lot more comfortable being up there. And number two is because so much of our terrain is so forbidding. Right. So in Colorado, we don't have that many places where we can actually safely land. I mean, we're as sailplane pilots, we're mostly confined to airports. I mean, sure, you can go into a farmer's field, but every landing in a farmer's field means that there's a risk that you might damage your glider. And those gliders are pretty expensive, and then when they're damaged, they're also down for months at a time. So you really don't want to damage your glider.
What about backcountry airports? Are they fine for you guys? Dirt and
Yeah,
grass, or not really?
most of them are not, because most of them are too narrow.
Oh,
The narrowness is the biggest issue, right? We've got these long wings and they're pretty close to the ground, and everyone who's, most of the people who have these big backcountry airstrips, they built them for, this big tire kind of backcountry airplanes
yeah.
that all
Tail
have very high
draggers.
wings. Tail draggers with high wings. And so if you land a glider there, the chances are you're going to catch a tree or a bush or something right on final approach, or just as you touch down, and you're touching down at 60 knots or 50 knots, maybe 45 knots, but that's still a lot of speed and a lot of energy that has to get dispersed. So if you touch down and you catch a wing, then this whole thing will turn around, and chances are your tail boom is broken. So you don't want to, most of the backcountry strips aren't good. So I spent an inordinate amount of time looking at landable places in Colorado. I've driven around. I have a drone that I fly over fields to check them out, and do measurements in Google Earth. How wide is the runway?
Wow,
I've got
you're
a detailed
dedicated.
detailed database of all the landable sites across Colorado that I personally am feeling comfortable I can use. Making it available to other people, but obviously always at their own risk. I mean, things change so quickly too. So, but most backcountry airports aren't very good.
Take me back, the people that you were talking about that get into it. First, how much does it cost if somebody's listening to this going, man, I really want to get into flying sailplanes?
It totally depends on whether they have aviation background or not. So if you're a paraglider, a hang glider pilot, or you're an airplane pilot, actually, I think hang glider and paraglider pilots will probably make the fastest transition, quite frankly, because for them, if you're good at it already, you already understand how this thing works. You know where to find lift. So then it's more about the mechanics of controlling a sailplane, and but you know what it is that you're controlling. Essentially, it's not going to take you a long time to figure it out. So typically, it takes somewhere between 20. It could be 20, 30, 40 flights with an instructor. These are usually short pattern flights where you just learn to control this thing. Then you fly your solo flights until your instructor is comfortable with you getting the license. It varies greatly. Usually gets more expensive the older you get, because it takes people more time. Kids learn it quicker. It's a few $1,000s usually until you get the license. And then if you are in a club environment, you don't have to have your own plane. I mean, it depends on the club, right? I mean, we're one of the that's also one of the distinguishing features of Boulder is we're just an amazing club. We have two very strong top state-of-the-art two-seaters, and we have two state-of-the-art high-performance single-seaters as club aircraft. So all of our members can fly those club gliders, and that's really cheap to do. But then if even if you want to own your own, the cost vary dramatically, right? So you can get a good sailplane, uh, a decent sailplane. It used to be world class level for $20,000-$30,000. But if you could buy, you could also buy a new state of the art competition glider that you would buy right now, and to be top of the line, that gets up to 250, 300,000. $300,000.
And
So the range is pretty wide, but you have just as much fun in a $20,000
right.
glider than you have in a $300,000
And
glider.
is that technology changing pretty rapidly, or is it just microscopic, improvements at
Yeah,
this
it's
point?
it's it's in stages. I think at this point it's more fine tuning. The latest generation of gliders that came out over the last 5 years is maybe has a 2% 4% performance improvement over the prior generation.
Hmm,
If you want to win in the worlds
that's a lot.
or you want to win in the nationals, 2, 3, 4% is not that much, right?
Oh, and for us, it'd be quite a bit. Okay.
In percentage terms, it's not glide points. Yeah, I
Hmm,
mean, my glider is, for example, my glider is 17 years old. It's the prior generation.
okay.
I've got a glide ratio of 48-1. I could get a new one now at the top line. They would be at maybe 56-1, something like that in 18-meter class. But I've done some math on it in comparison flights. I don't believe that those differences are as great as that difference. So
Oh,
I would
okay.
say it's a few percentage points.
So you can beat the guys on that. Just make a couple better decisions, and you're fine.
If you're making the better decisions, you're yeah yeah. The glider is secondary. It's the pilot that counts for the most part.
Ah, cool. All right. So when you come through with the club provides the planes, you pay your club dues, and you have access to these.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah,
Ah, cool.
yeah.
And is it growing worldwide?
It's we're it's The sport worldwide is not growing. We actually have a pretty good demand out here. Last year we had some bottlenecks with instruction because of COVID, so we actually had a long wait list of people wanting to join the club and getting
Yeah,
trained.
go do stuff.
Um, and we have there's some capacity constraints at the airport, but um, by and large, I think we don't have a lot of issues attracting people, and there's a lot. We also have a lot of former, particularly hang glider pilots. We've got a lot of hang glider pilots that are wanting to join the sport of soaring once they reach an age where they're no longer comfortable, that their legs are a
Can take the
very
hit.
that their legs are an appropriate landing gear
Ah,
substitute, basically.
interesting.
so
Okay.
so that's and our chief flight instructor is a former hang glider teacher, and he had a school, hang gliding school. Is also very strong sailplane racing contender. So yeah,
What?
there's a lot of interest, and we don't have that problem. There's a lot of clubs actually in the country that struggle, but
Yeah.
we're not one of them.
Okay. Ah, great. Back to learning. You said you learned when you were younger, when you were 16, you got your license, flew some, and then you left it for 25 years, and you've come back to it with this just dedication and passion. When you went from that newbie, you're coming back to it and you're just getting tossed out of the nest, what would be some advice to people in that same position to get to where you are now? What's a rapid way to, we always talk about in paragliding, there are no shortcuts. It's just time and currency and studying everything you possibly can if you're not getting the hours. But so there's obviously training, and you can do you can get there fast, but you've got to do all the work. There's no short, there's no there's not a, I don't know how to
Yeah,
say that, but
there's no substitute for flying experience. That is definitely true, but I think there's a lot of pilots who have been pilots for 20 years and have not made a lot of progress,
hmm,
versus there are pilots that can make a huge amount of progress in a few years. And I think there is the personal attitude that you have towards it makes a huge difference, and whether you actually really invest the time and the energy to understand what is going on in the atmosphere, how exactly is it working. There's a lot of studying that you can do. There's actually the theory really actually makes a big difference, right? But it's not the theory that you learn from the glider flying handbook on it. It's like government publications. You have to go well beyond that and really try to understand what is it that makes this thing work, right? And really try to understand the atmosphere. There is what we're lucky we have. There's a gliding. You probably have heard about this. The Condor soaring simulator.
Yeah.
It's basically a computer simulator for glider flight that is developed for competition glider flying. And it's also an esport platform, and it's actually a pretty serious esport platform. So I would recommend to anyone who wants to fly gliders, that is a great tool for progression, simply because there are certain things, like for example, thermal entry and keeping the right bank angle, keeping the speed, keeping the staying centered or making centering corrections. You can do this perfectly in the simulator, and that isn't that different, quite frankly, from the real life. So if you can do this well in the simulator, you can probably do it well in real life. So that's a big difference, because that's cost free. You can do it every day. Soaring weather on the simulator is good every single day. I mean, you can just basically put in the weather that you want to have in the simulator, right? So you put in the parameters that you want to use. It's not perfect, right? By any stretch of the imagination, it's not perfect. It doesn't have it in the current generation. It doesn't have convergence. It doesn't have thunderstorms. It doesn't have the wave is still not very good, but thermals are pretty good. Ridge lift is exceptionally well done, maybe a little bit too strong than in real life, but there's a lot of things that are very, very similar, and that is something you can practice with, and I found that super useful. So I actually did before I came back. I did some simulator flying, and I got into the plane, and after 25 years of not sitting in a glider, they basically said, "Oh, you can still do this." I'm amazed. So I was basically back into it on day one, just because I had done maybe 200-300 hours on the simulator.
And are these? Can you get in the Condor and do a flight simulation anywhere in the world? Is it built
Anywhere?
for?
I mean,
really?
there's people, there's volunteers that are creating sceneries, and those are photorealistic sceneries. It's a lot of work. It's volunteer work. There's a hugely committed community towards doing this stuff, and there's multiplayer racing every single day. So if somebody wants to be committed and doing multiplayer racing, you can fly, at a super high level. I mean, these guys are just as good as the top world-class soaring glider pilots in the world on the simulator. And really? I think if you're top on the simulator, there's no doubt in my mind that you can get into a glider, and with after the basic instruction and learning how to operate in an airport, the counter doesn't teach you that stuff very well, right? It's really more about the flight itself and dealing with decisions on how far can I glide, how do I final glide calculations, how do I do how do I do the thermaling, what is the tactic, when do I fly fast, when do I fly slow, how do I switch gears, which side of on which side of the ridges will I find lift, where will the lift come up. This is really well modeled, and so I would seriously suggest anyone who wants to make this is definitely a great boost in speed. Maybe not a shortcut, but a great boost in speed.
Wow, that's fascinating.
And I know there's people who are pressuring the Condor people to create some modules to open it up for paragliding and for.
I know paragliders use it a lot to see terrain beforehand. One of my friends that was in the XOps with me, Eduardo, talked about that he kept going through the course over and over again. And of course, the speed's not correct.
It's fantastic to learn
great
scenery.
To see it. Yeah.
So when I flew, for example, last year in the 18-meter nationals in Nephi in Utah. And Condor is a perfect way to learn the scenery. So when I showed up there, I knew where the mountain ranges were. I knew I knew the terrain. I knew how wide the gaps were. I knew where the terrain transitions would become a problem, because you have to go, for example, if you go across the Wasatch Plateau from the east side to the west side, you fly into rising terrain, and you have a sense of how wide that is, and how high you have to be on the east side so you can make the safe transition over the west side without getting stuck on top of the plateau, which would be not a good place to be.
No, yeah, we don't want to
Yeah.
land in the Uintas either.
Right.
This a friend of mine, Stuart Midwinter, back in the day, flew all of it. Flew hang gliders, paragliders, or early paragliders and sailplanes. And he reached out after the show I did with Chuck on the Soaring the Sky podcast, and said that he saw back in the day. I'm curious from you what you're seeing now, that foot launch pilots, so paragliders and hang gliders, are way more comfortable banking it up in sailplanes than pilots that just get into sailplanes and don't have any of that experience. They're more comfortable in the cockpit using the air. Does that make sense? They get it faster. Now, obviously, that makes sense that they get it faster because they know how it all works. The principles are all exactly the same. But have you also seen that they thermal differently? In other words, he was postulating that they definitely core tighter, that they're willing to.
Yes.
Interesting.
Yes, that is true. So paragliders and hang gliders coming into sailplane flying, they have a better sense. They have definitely a much better appreciation where the thermal originates off the ground.
Okay.
And that is because when you start off with sailplanes, your instinct is never to be close to the ground, because we just can't be safe, right? Because we have to keep a landable spot in glide. And even though, yes, our glide is way further than in hang gliders or paragliders, it's still hard to find. Keeping the airport in glide keeps you usually further off the ground, and also because our higher speed requires a much greater turn radius to begin with. There's usually not. It's very difficult to get that sense where exactly the thermal generate is coming off the ground. Usually you're finding it somewhere under the clouds. Most of the time you're actually orienting yourself by the clouds and not by the ground. Mm-hmm. It's rare that, especially in the early years when people start to glide, that they focus on the ground. They focus more on the clouds, especially out here in the western US, where the cloud bases are as high as they are. Mm-hmm. But if the hang glide, all those foot launches, right, that you described, well, you start on the ground. Right, so of course you're gonna look for thermals based on the terrain and not on the clouds. It's not like you go up on the hog back here in Boulder and you look up into the sky and say, "Oh, there's a nice cumulus up there at 18,000 or 22,000 feet. Right, I'm gonna launch right now because it's up there." That you can't do that. So. You know exactly, this nook and this cranny and these rocks, that's where the lift is probably going to come from. And most glider pilots don't think that way. Especially not at the beginning. It's a progression, and you have to deliberately get there. And then even if you know that's where it is, that happens to me all the time when I'm flying. Is I'm like, there is probably a thermal coming off these rocks. And then I fly there and I notice there is a thermal coming off these rocks. But with my minimum speed, especially when I'm flying ballasted, so I put water in the wings and make the glider extra heavy. And now I have to turn at least 60 knots to be safely turning. So if you turn at 60 knots and you crank it even if you crank it at 50-degree bank angle, you're still making a pretty wide circle. And chances are that this little thermal that is coming off these rocks is not usable. Yeah. Versus you in a paraglider, you can just park yourself right on the rock and you make your way up.
Sure. How much of your decision making is made? And I'll ask you to answer this without thinking that we have an audience for a second, because I would imagine as you get better and better, start getting bigger and bigger distances, you start worrying less and less about places to land. But is that the case in sailplane flying? Because we're always taught I'm sure the same thing you are. Never fly over an unlandable place and always have
Yeah.
something on glide. But as you get better and better, you don't worry about that. You know there's going to be a climb. You know you can fly over this huge section of trees where there's no place to land. And if you've got the skills and you can read the sky and the crossing I did of the Canadian Rockies, we flew hours sometimes without a place to land. And that's a whole nother level of flying. I'm not suggesting people do that, but we're not really so confined by an airport. Obviously we can put it down in a tiny little scratch pad. And so I'm just wondering, but to me, when I think about sailplanes, not knowing anything about it, that would be an overriding concern. You're flying a really expensive aircraft that you can't just put it down in a little postage stamp. Is that a big deal, or has it become less and less?
It becomes less and less, but it is a big deal. And I mean, I think individual risk tolerance comes hugely into play in that area. So if somebody is like, I just love this so much. If I wreck my $300,000 glider, I'll just buy a new one. If and I'm confident that I can survive. They might take the approach that they might take the approach as, doesn't matter, I'll find lift straight ahead. Others maybe less so, right? I mean, where I'm at is I'm at the point where I'm if I'm absolutely confident, and sometimes I am just totally confident, right, that there is going to be lift. It's just totally confident. Then I don't worry about it. But I've reached this point in my progression where I'm that is often the case, that I can really, if it's like 100%, I know it's 100%. But if it's only 90%, I will hesitate. Then I will not do it and risk. I will not go into unlandable terrain if I'm only 90% confident that I can fly out of it.
Okay.
That just does not work, because I can't take a 10-1. I can't take a 9-1 gamble that I'm gonna wreck my glider. Even if nine is that I won't, but a 10% risk,
that's pretty high.
It's pretty high. Yeah, I mean, I'm not doing.
So you've got to be way more constrained by places to land than
you are. But what is offsetting this though is that you have way better glide.
Sure.
Right, and I mean, for the most part, I mean, if I'm at, we're in Boulder, and where the Wyoming border is like 60 miles to the north. If I'm at the Wyoming border at 17,000 feet, I'm in glide of Boulder.
Okay.
Right. So I mean, for us, more oftentimes I can fly from Boulder. You can fly. You can. There's this badge progression that we have, so that you go from, silver. There's a silver badge and a gold badge and a diamond badge. The diamond badge requires you to do a 500-kilometer flight and a 300-kilometer declared goal flight. You can get almost all the badges in Boulder by flying within glide range.
Wow.
It's unbelievable. It's unbelievable. We don't have to get even out of Boulder. You don't even have to go to other airport. You don't even have to think of other airports to have to be in glide. So oftentimes you can it's not hard to keep airports in glide, and even if they're far away.
How do you think about when you said, if it's a 90% chance? So when you're somewhere pretty deep, and your glide computer showing that you've got so-and-so airport on you said you're all things considered null, your glide on your wing is, did you say 48-1 or 45-1 or something? Okay. So
48-1.
Are you calculating, okay, this is safe, I've got this on glide per current conditions? Or are you going, okay, it's saying that I can get there on a 60-1 glide, and I've got this crazy tailwind, I'm getting 80-90-1 right now, but that could change to 35-1, so I'm going to go to 35-1.
No, you basically do it on current conditions.
Okay.
And so you watch the I'm assuming you have the same thing, where you can put on your glide computer, you can put a current glide L over D and a required glide over L over D.
Totally.
And you can look at those side by side, and you say, well, my required glide L over D is 40, but my current is 60. I'm like, I'm pretty sure I'm gonna get there.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you're just
On the
constantly
other,
balancing those things.
I look at those two things all the time, and then you also look at you can use the McCready settings for what you think the next climb is going to be, and dial those up, and they will actually they make you fly faster. And when you fly faster, obviously your your sink rate is higher, and your glide goes down. So that actually gives you, in your flight computer, if you look at what is necessary to reach a safe airport, and you have a McCready setting of 4, that gives you an inbuilt safety cushion into this thing, because it assumes that you're flying faster than you actually have to fly. So you could get a better glide if you have to. So you can dial it back down. If you find that conditions deteriorate, you can dial the speed a little bit back, and then you can still get there. For you guys, wind is way more. I mean, wind is important for us. Obviously, it's very important for us. Headwind, tailwind. It doesn't have nearly as much. As an impact.
Wind can just totally kill us for
we
sure.
can kill it, right? I mean, you have a 30 knot headwind.
No,
what do you do? What do you?
You can't even fly
do?
in that. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no, you're terrified if you're going downwind, and you're terrified even more if you're trying to go upwind, because you're not. You're flying backwards. Let's talk about risk for a second. You mentioned something in our email exchanges before we sat down today that surprised me, that sailplanes are statistically not that dissimilar. There's a big difference there. You'll talk about that, but that surprised me. People are cratering in sailplanes too.
Like when I came back to the sport, I really wanted to understand how dangerous it really is. And so the way I thought about this was, I tried to look at all kinds of activities that people do in their spare time that are somewhat risky. And I tried to say, I tried to figure out what's the chance that you die doing it within a certain by activity hour. So per hour that you're doing it, right? So how long can you safely do it before you were basically expected to get killed? It doesn't sound very good.
No, but it's aviation.
And so I did that study, and I tried. It was really hard to come by good data. Really, really difficult. So I tried, and it took me a few months to do this over the winter. There wasn't any flying, and I didn't have anything else related to do. So I worked on this stuff. Yeah, it's not hugely dissimilar. So flying gliders, the risk of dying in gliders per hour is not a lot lower than it is for paragliders. It is lower. I think it's about 1.5 is the difference factor. So it's 1.5 times more risky to your life in paragliders or in hang gliders than it is for gliders. But that risk difference isn't it's not very high. I mean, it's like, if you compare it to commercial aviation, we're now talking 200 times less risky, not 1.5 times less risky.
Okay.
Right? So it's like we're in totally different orders of magnitude, versus we're in the same order of magnitude. We're not far off, quite frankly.
Wow.
We have a lesser risk of getting severely injured on top of that dying risk. I'm assuming every takeoff, every landing in paragliders has some inherent risk.
Definitely.
You're going to have some injury of to your legs or to your back or to I don't know.
Yeah, no, that's definitely where statistically it's launching and landing. It's very that certainly we have a lot of the catastrophic stuff that happens low to the ground in the sky. Typically if you're high, people can deal with it, and reserves work really well. But it's the stuff that you would think. It's the launching and landing, and it's when you're trying to scratch out and you're low. You're trying to get up from a low position.
And I also looked deeply in detail into what is it that actually makes it so dangerous. What are the really root causes? So I read a ton of accident reports. And in many countries, they're doing a lot of work on accident reports. Germany is in particular. Germany has about accounts for a third of all glider flying worldwide. And they do an exceptionally great job at documenting every incident. And I speak German, so that helps understanding these reports. So I went into and tried to find out, what are the really root causes? When do people get into a situation where they kill themselves? And is it pilot's fault, or is somebody else to blame? And I found about 90% of accidents can be avoided. So I think that's an important thing. So you can actually think about it. Like in 90%, you'd say, yep, you could definitely have made a different decision as the pilot. So that's really then understanding why is it, what went wrong, why did it go wrong. And then I found that the single most important root cause is when a pilot delays the decision to land for gliders. I can't say that for anything else. But if you're getting too low, and a lot of them happen right next to the airport, people come back and they find the runway is occupied, and they're like, I don't want to push my glider back so far. I don't want to land far at the far end and then push the glider back. I'm going to wait until this runway is clear. And then they keep circling and circling and circling. And then they find themselves, okay, finally the runway is clear. Now they're so low, they try to fly the final approach. Then they make the turn to final. And there's trees in the way, and they're trying to get over the trees. And now they're getting below stall speed. And suddenly the glider spins in because they're below stall speed, and they're on a shallow. But they try to, then they try to fly uncoordinated and keep the lower wing up by flying the turn with the rudder. Now they're skidding through the turn and they spin in, and that's the recipe for death, basically. Because once you're spinning in a glider close to the ground, that's when you die. Because now you're rotating into the ground, and the wing is going to hit the ground first, and it just drives the nose into the ground, and then you die. So that's a classic case, very simple to avoid incident. Just make your decision to land early enough.
I never thought about that with you guys. That we were talking about. I was imagining, okay, you're at 16,000 feet, and you've got Grand Junction on glide, and you decide, okay, it's the end of the day. I'm going to go there, and you give yourself 200 feet of wiggle room, maybe not nearly enough, and then you get there and the runway's occupied. So are you talking to the tower way in advance to make sure you guys can't just go on around a few more times?
Yeah, I mean, usually the way you do it differently. So yeah, first of all, most of our airport landings are not towers. They're just uncontrolled airports.
Okay.
But the way you approach it is you're supposed to approach an airport that you are arriving at 1,000 feet above ground.
Oh, okay.
So whenever my flight computer is set to 1,500 feet, especially for airports that I don't. It's set to 1,500 feet for airports that I am not familiar with.
Okay.
And where there may be more air traffic. And especially in most cases, when you arrive at an airport that doesn't have glider operations, chances are nobody has a freaking clue about gliders. I've talked to many airplane pilots, and they're like, a glider? What is that? So there's a lot of airplane pilots who don't even know that we exist. Wow. So now you turn up at an airport and you're in the pad and you say, I'm a glider, I'm about to land here. I'm like, a glider? And then somebody will tell you, you're number 3. You're number 3 to land. Hold. hold your altitude. I'm like, I can't. I can't hold my altitude. I'm landing right now.
So that's common? Really? Wow.
It would be common. So basically what you do is when you land at another airport, you arrive high enough, you announce yourself, you say, I'm a glider and I'm about to land, and then if somebody pushes back, you just tell them you're unable to do whatever they wish to do, and you're allowed to do it. You have priority by the rules. It's just most people don't know about it.
Right. So you can just be a little verbally forceful.
But it's not a situation where I'm going on a final glide and I'm like, I'm
barely going to squeak it in.
Yeah, barely going to squeak in. I mean, some people do that, but it's not a safe practice. I would definitely not. But it doesn't have to happen. It really usually does not have to happen. The only times when these things tend to happen is in soaring competitions, as they used to have them when they had the arrival at the deck, basically just at ground level at the airport. Those rules are gone. So all our competitions. So for example, when I flew the nationals last year, the arrival was 1,500 AGL, so 1,500 feet
If you've got a whole
above ground. So
end
you
of speed
basically have to
cylinder, you've got an end of speed, so the
a,
race
a
stops, and then
cylinder,
you got plenty of
a
time to.
finish, a finished cylinder. You're getting into the finished cylinder. You have to be over 1,500 feet to not get penalties. You're getting penalized if you come in lower than that. And so you basically, and the penalties are so high, it's not worth it. So you definitely want to arrive at 1,500 or above. And if you arrive at 1,500, there's plenty of time. Now you've got a few minutes if you need to sort out the landing. And especially in the contest, I think it's hugely important, because now in the contest, you've got 20 gliders arriving at the same time. So now you've got a runway.
Yeah.
You gotta sequence your landing somehow, right?
The can we dig into that 90% could be avoided a little bit more? What are the other things
Yeah.
that really popped out? So you talked about, that for the most part, it was people not landing early enough, not making a decision
Delaying the
early enough.
decision to land is a huge factor.
Yeah.
Another huge factor is flying too close to the ground, especially in ridge flying conditions.
Okay.
Where people will just get hit the ground. So one risk, for example, is that thermals, and you must have the same thing. So you're flying along the ridge, and you get a thermal that is starting right off where you are. It creates a lot of turbulence around it. So what can happen in a glider is, if, let's say, you're flying on the ridge and there's an outcropping below the ridge, and the thermal is breaking off below the ridge, not at ridge top, but it's breaking off below the ridge. That thermal can be so strong, as you fly through it, it can lift up your the wing that is that is away from the ridge,
the
and it will
windward
actually
side
turn the glider right into the ridge.
Mm.
And I don't know if you run into that situation.
Oh yeah, totally. I mean, the worst thing with I guess what would happen to us is you could take a collapse on the ridge side, which is worst case scenario, because then you're spinning in towards the hill rather than taking a collapse on the other. So no, it happens a lot.
Yeah, so ridge flying, close proximity to terrain, it's just basically that's a judgment call. So in that case, it's sort of, I count those as avoidable. Some people, I mean, it depends on your viewpoint, right? I mean, every accident is avoidable by not flying. So I mean, but that's not how we can look at it, right? So it comes to a judgment call, whether you call. But what hardly ever happens to us, and this is, I think, is a big difference. It's equipment issues are hardly ever an issue. And if it's the equipment, then it's usually the pilot's fault for putting it together the wrong way. So that used to be a big issue for old gliders. And if somebody goes into gliding and they buy an old glider that doesn't have automatic hookups, so it basically means as you put the glider together, you have to hook up each of the control surfaces separately from actually assembling it. There have been numerous accidents over the years where people forget to hook up, let's say, the elevator control. If you hook up and forget that, and you're on takeoff roll, you take off behind the tow plane, and you have no elevator control, you're already crashed. There's really nothing you can do about it.
That we call those schoolboy errors. He's just making dumb mistakes.
Right, that's a dumb mistake. Yeah. But those don't happen with modern gliders because they all have automatic hookups. So when you put it together, the controls are already hooked up too. You still have to check it. But equipment failure is hardly ever the reason. So these gliders are way more sturdy than the airplanes. So turbulence will not do anything. You're
not going to get a wing ripped off if it's booming.
It's it happens, but it's so exceptionally rare. It's exceptionally rare. I mean, it would be like if you're flying, say you're flying above VNE in wave, and you're just hitting the mother of all rotors. That's basically what would have to happen. So if you like slow down to 100 knots and not do it at 150 knots when you hit the rotor, it's not gonna be a problem. You might hit your head on the canopy pretty hard, but the glider will, those gliders are super sturdy.
Is wave the most dangerous flying you do?
No, I don't think
No.
so. No, I mean wave can be dangerous. Wave can be dangerous. I mean, wave could be very dangerous depending on how you fly in wave. That's really comes back to the pilot again. I mean, the risks in wave are, obviously your oxygen has to work, so you have the hypoxia risk. There's a risk that you get dragged into cloud. That could be a catastrophic risk if you're at high altitude. Now you get dragged into a lenticular cloud that builds right on your side. You might not even see it if you don't watch out for it. But those happen rarely. First of all, not many people fly in wave conditions at these altitudes, so the frequency of those is pretty low. Um, I would say, for in practical terms, a risk I'm concerned about is that my glide path to the airport gets blocked by thunderstorms,
Mm.
especially with big hail. So we do have that here. So each time I come back from the west towards Boulder, for example, you fly across the Continental Divide, and there's sometimes you have to make a decision: do I commit to flying towards Boulder? Or do I stay on the west side, depending on what the sky looks like, without knowing for absolutely certain that there's a clear path towards landing?
Mm.
So that is, I think, weather risks are a risk. You could avoid that, obviously. That would, in my book, count as an avoidable accident, as a pilot mistake,
Go
because
somewhere
I
else.
could just say, yeah, okay, I'll land in Granby on the other side, and just have to call my buddies, and they have to get the trailer, and then they have to drive for 5 hours and
Oh,
pick me up.
good segue. How important, how much weight do you, as a community, not just you, but is it to get home? It's not as easy to retrieve as we are. You don't get to go out on the road and stick your thumb out. Is that
No,
is
but
that
most
weigh heavily on you, or on a big day you don't care? You're going to go big.
we go big, and we have it's in our community. We have a volunteer retrieve list, so everyone, and in our club we've got probably 40 members that are on that list, who basically say, well, and it's a mutual commitment. We just basically say, if somebody lands somewhere else, we're gonna retrieve them, and in exchange, you have the promise that you will be retrieved, by your buddies,
Mm.
right? So it's a mutual thing, but it doesn't happen very often. So in practical terms, it's not a big deal because we don't often land somewhere else. I mean, there's very few times in my it's close to 1,000 hours now. I've very few times that I actually had to land somewhere that I didn't intend to land at.
Mm.
So it doesn't happen
Take
that
the
often.
day. Take the day and imagine, a perfect day is 100%. What percentage? So we've got, mind frame, preparation, currency, all the things that go into making, you're going to go out and do a 1500K FAI triangle, the biggest you've ever done. I don't know. I just threw that out there, but
That would be a big one. Yeah.
that'd be a big one. How much of that is weather, and not by that day? I'm talking forecasting. How much of that is you spending time in front of a computer looking at? Tell me, is it SkySight, XC
Hmm.
Skies, NOAA? What
Hmm.
So tell me the
Hmm.
resources you use, and
Hmm.
carve that up.
Yep. It is, for me, it's SkySight most of the time,
Okay.
and I do use XC Skies. I'm struggling a little bit with picking which model which model to pick. There's so many models, and it depends on the site that you're at. Which model tends to be giving
Mm,
you the better results
mm,
than the other model. So I find just most of the time I'm just too lazy to try and study 8 different models.
yeah.
I tend to personally I tend to use SkySight. There is some other resources too. Dr. Jax is for us. I don't know if that rings a bell.
Yeah, we use Dr.
Um,
Jack's a lot. So you use the balloon soundings.
we use that. We use soundings. Yeah, but uh, for the most part, SkySight is actually Sky has become my go-to tool. I used Top Meteor for a while. Um, how much do I spend on it? Usually watch the weather a few days in advance for looking for good days. When I know, or the evening before is usually when I do my task planning. So the forecast is good enough that I will spend maybe an hour at night looking at the weather, and that's when I plan the task. So where should I go? What turn points should I declare that would be best aligned with the weather, and um, when will it get me on final glide early enough? And you do the timing calculations of when do you have to take off, and where do you have to be at each of the turn points to make it back home. Um, and and then on the day off, I'll check in the morning before I drive to the airport. I'll check if something has changed, and that might cause me to change some of the turn points, or it might dial the whole thing back, or it might make me expand it a little more. But that's about the extent.
We have this saying that, fly the day, not your desire. And I've often found, if I put a lot of effort the night before into, I've seen it usually a few days out on GFS, and okay, it's looking like a good day, and you start rallying your crew, and Thursday looks good, and start thinking about, okay, what can we do with this? If I, on the way up to launch, I've got my task in, and if I've often found that it's hard for me to break from that. If I've set that up as a goal, man, I
Mm-hmm.
want to fly that goal. Whereas, it's obvious that that's not setting up now. Models
Yeah,
are just models, right? And
right.
do you find that also
Oh
hard?
yeah. I mean, there's maybe I would say I would probably complete maybe one out of two tasks, or maybe one out of three tasks. So if I set myself ambitious tasks, I'm completing one in three tasks, and it's just as you fly and you find, it's what the task that I set for myself is just not going to work, but I'm going to still enjoy the day, and I'm going to change my plan.
Hmm.
But I think that is very up to the individual. So and how stubborn you are, and how flexible you are, and I mean, there are people who don't like to do task planning at all. We have people in the club that have like, I I like this task. It's usually the weather is good, and that's the task that I want to accomplish this year. And each time they take off, they try that task, and they haven't spent any time really understanding if that task is supported by the weather on that particular day. They just try to do that task,
Hmm.
and but chances are it will take them a long time to complete the task, unless the task is really simple, right? I mean, there's tasks you can set yourself tasks you can complete almost any day, but yeah, I think that's totally individual.
I'm going to ask you a question. I'm not sure you can even answer, but we talked about that hang gliders, paragliders, foot launch pilots might have this advantage coming to sailplanes because of their background and their understanding of thermals, and being more comfortable with banking it up. Is we're just more comfortable doing that in our aircraft, maybe. But uh, what do you think would be the reverse? Are there some things that sailplane pilots uh, that we don't know, that we're not clued into, that if we reversed roles there, what would be the whoa? What could you teach me that I probably don't know?
Whew, I think that's a difficult one. I mean, we have. I really don't know what you don't know.
Yeah,
I
that's a
guess
hard one, isn't it? Yeah.
my problem, right? Um, I mean, where would we be really good that a paraglider, a foot launch pilot might not be
For
as
example,
as
Chuck
good?
asked me a question in the show that I was really surprised. He said that his buddies that fly out at Marshall in the San Bernardino mountains,
Yeah.
they'll often be up there on a blue day and having a good day, and they don't see paragliders. And
Mm-hmm.
I was that really caught me off guard, because I thought, well, they're
Mm-hmm.
either not seeing them, or
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that crew as well as I thought, because I thought that, I know I have a lot of friends that fly out there religiously. A bunch of them live there, and if
Mm-hmm.
it's a flyable day, they're flying. They don't care if it's blue. I mean, we obviously, just like you, I'm sure we love it when there's clouds, but
Yeah.
blue days are, you got to train for those too. And so my thought was it's probably more windy than those guys. We can't handle a lot of wind, and I would
Yeah,
imagine it's just more windy on those days. And
that's
for a
what I
sailplane
that's what I
pilot,
suspect.
it's
Yeah,
fine. But
that's what I suspect. I don't see that blue day thing as I was surprised, quite frankly, about that observation when I listened to the podcast.
yeah,
And I mean, I listened to your answer. I think there was some discussion about you thought there were way more paraglider pilots out there than glider pilots, and as glider pilots, we think there are more glider pilots out there than there are paraglider pilots,
awesome. See, I love
which is
this. I
so. I thought that might be a good point of discussion. If I fly out of Boulder, I often see it's a pretty big paraglider community.
Yeah.
It's a reasonable I mean, you tell me how many. I don't
It's
know,
I
but
think it's very big. I don't know the numbers, but I know
it's
that
a
I
reasonably
think it's the
big paraglider
fastest
community.
growing region in the States for paragliding. That that
Yeah,
their club's
but
doing a
when
good
I
job.
go fly, most of the time I see glider pilots, and I don't see paraglider pilots during flight. So the time when I see paraglider pilots is right after launch, right? Especially on days when you can actually get off from the airport as a glider pilot reasonably early. We oftentimes have to tow far deep into the mountains, but most of the time we don't. But sometimes we don't. And the paragliders, most of the paraglider traffic here tends to be pretty close to the foot of the hills,
Exactly. Yeah.
and it doesn't go deep in. Versus we fly always deep in. And when I talk to paraglider pilots, they tell me, well, they look at our flight traces online and they say, how on earth are you going to fly that far back? I wish I could fly that far back. And they listen to my stories about the convergence line and where the convergence line sets up and how it sets up and how to use it for flying straight. And I'm like, I wish I could get back there. And I'm like, well, me too, because if I don't get back there, I can't fly at all. Uh,
Yeah.
I often so we tend to fly in different spaces most of the time, and it's rare. So it's I mean I do see occasionally I see paraglider pilots high up in the sky, far away from anywhere. So happened in Utah last year. Happened a few times where I'm like over the Wasatch and at 17,000 feet. I'm like, holy shit, there's a paraglider, and I say holy shit because we have and I think that's maybe if the sport grows and keeps growing, I there's a potential for a safety risk
Sure.
because the glider pilots with our technology we're increasingly obviously you have to look out the window and you do all the time because you're looking for the clouds and you're looking for where to find lift. But in terms of orientating yourself where other traffic is, we're the technology has so advanced that we see everybody where they are. And increasingly, all the gliders have ADS, have transponders, they have FLARM, so we have anti-collision systems, increasingly even ADS-B out. And the more technology there is in gliders, the more you expect that any object that is flying
Yeah.
around in the sky shows up on your instruments. And if you don't see anything on your instruments, your brain might assume nothing is there.
Yeah, and I mean, let's face it, if we're at the same elevation and we're ships in the night, coming right at one another, we are really hard to see for you guys, and vice
Well, I think
versa,
you guys are actually a lot easier to see than gliders.
Well, yeah, I was going to say, I mean,
They're
you're
way easier. You
much
got
tougher.
colorful canopies and
Right, but if it's
and
right at the same level, you
it
don't, and it's
is.
one thing if we're banked up, but if we're right
Yeah.
at the same level, it's, same thing. It's hard for us to see one another. And so,
I mean, we're freaked out. I mean, gliders against gliders.
yeah,
That is
I
the
bet.
biggest concern, right? So because we fly the same lift lines, right? And most of our flying is straight, as I said, right? I mean, I think my average for last year was I think below 20% circling percentage. So it's 80% of my time that I fly is straight. More than
Wow,
80% of the time I fly
sexy.
straight.
Yeah.
but so but now and it's at 100 knots. And so now you've got two gliders coming at each other at 100 knots. Closing speed is 200 knots, and we're flying exactly the same lift lines, right? We're flying the same height band, usually between 14,000 and 15,000 and 17,500, somewhere between 15 and 17.5. That is for the most part where I spend my time. Almost
Are,
all of my cross country flights are almost all in that height band,
so mid-airs
and
must happen.
They do happen, yeah. They don't happen that often. We're more concerned about them than is statistically
Sure.
appropriate, if you will.
Right.
In Europe, it's a bigger concern because there's more glider traffic, much more glider traffic, especially in Germany and in the Alps.
Yeah.
That's where you have a lot more glider traffic. But for us, it's a big concern. That's why we have all that technology in gliders. And so now I'm saying, I'm always monitoring. I'm like, I know where my buddies are flying. The entire flight, I know where people are. And we also will make radio calls to each other and say, I'm here. I'm over Mount Evans, and I'm northbound 17,000 feet northbound. And so everyone knows northbound means that he's gonna fly along the convergence,
Right. Huh.
and exactly know where, right? So we monitor each other, and we communicate with one another, and so we're trying to have this situational awareness and mental picture of where everybody is.
Yeah, and our new Varios often have F-alarm now, and it's slowly
Oh, you do
transitioning.
have Flarm now too.
Yeah,
That's
it's
yeah.
slowly transitioning. Not many people here
Mm-hmm.
because it's not nearly as most other pilots don't have it yet. That
Yeah.
and when you're in the Alps, it's highly recommended because everybody's got them. All the sailplanes have
Yeah.
them, and but here we just, like you said, there's not that much traffic, and so I think it's
Yeah.
been a much slower uptake. It's definitely, people are talking about it on the forums and stuff, and I think, hopefully it'll get there. The big change for us has been, pretty much every pilot has an inReach these days, and
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
you know
we fly
that's
with
that's
those too.
terrific.
Yeah,
Yeah, I'm
yeah.
sure you
I
do.
mean, it must be complicated because you've got a lot less room to carry stuff, right?
Yeah,
And
and
you
everything's a
also have
weight
to carry it
decision.
up the mountain,
Yeah,
right? I mean, you basically have to
absolutely.
carry all this
Yeah, I mean,
stuff.
we try to trim wherever we possibly can, but
Yeah.
but our Varios are, they're in the low grams. They're tiny, and it's just an audible Vario, and it connects to your phone. So
Mm-hmm.
the phone has really eliminated a lot of the stuff that we used to have to carry, and then and the F-alarm is built in there, so it's
Mm-hmm.
tiny. It's just no big deal. What we don't have is, a very easy way. You'd have to have another device. They have it on the phone now too, to show you, so we see you too. Mostly it's
Mm-hmm.
set up so you can see us, and we rely on you because you've got a nice cockpit, and you've got better
Yeah.
instruments to avoid us. It's not so
Yeah.
much the other way
Well,
around, but
also you're much less maneuverable. You're just much slower.
that's it. I mean,
It's
if you
very
came right
hard
at
to.
us, you're
Yeah, I
we're
mean, it's
toast.
hard to avoid, right? I mean, I'm super careful when I fly with paragliders. I mean, I enjoy it. I really enjoy it, and I use, it's kind of fun to people circling in the middle and you just flying around them, and it's a nice competition and see if I can keep up.
Yeah, and I've never talked to anybody that minds flying with sailplanes. It's always a wave, and we're psyched, and it's always thrilling for us to see, how fast you go, So Chuck asked me now, is it annoying to fly with sailplanes? I've never, I've heard of a couple mid-airs with sailplanes and paragliders in the Alps, and the ones I've heard about have been catastrophic for both parties, so it's something
Yeah.
obviously we're careful about, but we know you are too. And it's same thing. You don't turn nearly as tight as we do. So when we're in a thermal together, it's pretty easy to share.
Yeah, yeah. It's usually it's not a problem. I mean, there's only so many people I can watch out for, right? So if there's more than three or four in a gaggle, I tend to stay away from it. I don't like to fly with
Yeah.
when you have a gaggle of with 20 paragliders. This is not. It's not. I'm not gonna mess with that. It's
Clemens, what's
too
the what's
dangerous.
the in your sport? I hung out with Gary Asoba quite a bit. I think a legend in hang gliding. He was the one that found Zapata, or a group of those guys found Zapata. I'm not sure if it was actually him, but I've talked to him quite a bit. He's down in Moriarty, and he talks about flying speed. His big thing now is flying really, really fast, and not so much the 10-hour, 11-hour trying to break distance records, but trying to get around the course or the task. as fast as possible, no, more nose down, kind of flying like you talked about. It sounds like with
Hmm.
X contest now, or however you're. Do you use X contest? Is that
No,
it's a different?
it's different. Yeah,
Okay,
it's different.
so but is it are you building towards Perlan? Is that just the ultimate in sailplanes, or what is it?
No, Perlin is very specific. That's one glide. It's one glider that is specifically built to fly in ultra high wave. It has to have a pressurized cockpit. I mean, it's not our world. I mean, we watched Perlin out of great interest, right? We fascinated by it, but it's more as a spectator.
Mm.
I had a chance to. They had a simulator for Perlin at the last soaring convention, and you could fly in the simulator and land the Perlin thing. You almost can't see out of this glider because the windows are on the side and they're like round holes, and you can't even look straight. I mean,
Oh, really?
I wouldn't be for me. No, no. The gliders. There's I would say there's a few different. I mean, like in all sports, right? People have different intentions, but the sport of soaring, I would say there's comps. Obviously, there's racing, so people who just enjoy that, and that is as much of a social thing than anything else. You just like to compete and you like to fly with your friends. That's where you go to soaring contests. You don't usually use the full day. You don't fly as far as you could, right? So, for example, at this 18-meter nationals that I mentioned, we had like the most amazing weather. We had one of the fastest soaring flights that were ever flown, which is pretty amazing. We had almost everybody finished with more than 100 miles per hour average speed. So the winning speed, John Seaborn, our local champion here, and he finished that day first. He flew 188 kph, so 118 miles per hour, I believe, 118 miles per hour. This
God.
was over a 568 kilometer task, but we only flew a 568 kilometer task.
Yeah.
That day it would have supported easily 1500 because
Whoa.
that was just an absolutely amazing day, right? But that's what you do at contests. You fly with friends, you fly fast, you compete, you're having fun, right?
Mm.
So that's one side. There's a few guys, and I really admire them that do these absolutely amazing, spectacular flights. A lot of them are in Europe. There's not a lot in the US, but I'm super fascinated by them. I find it super inspiring. There's a guy called Klaus Ullmann.
Yes.
I think
I've
he's
been trying to get him on the show. I want to get
must
him
be
on the
around
show.
80 or something. I'm not
Yes.
sure, but he's
Legend.
an amazing, a legend, absolutely a legend. And he would fly these unbelievable flights where he takes off in France, in the Alps, and then he crosses the sea to Corsica, and then he climbs in wave over Corsica, and then he will fly over to Italy, and then he flew from Italy. He flew down in Italy, flew down to Sicily. He climbed in wave.
What?
He crossed over to Greece, and then he crossed Greece.
Jesus.
He crossed Greece and landed close to the Turkish border. I mean,
What?
isn't that unbelievable in a
I
sailplane?
So I've heard all these triangle stories that blow my mind, but you're basically
No,
following the Alps. This is what? Are you serious? That is
I'm serious.
crazy.
That was last year or 2 years before, 2 years ago, something like that, a year ago. Unbelievable flight.
Oh
There's
my God.
another guy did the same Corsica thing to Italy, but he then flew a triangle back. He flew north in Italy, so he had to go in wave across to Corsica, and then in wave to go climb in wave in Corsica high enough to get to Italy, and then he had to ridge soared a portion, and then he thermal soared through the Po Valley, which was almost impossible, and then he had to get back over through thermals over the Alps to make it back to the starting point, and that was a triangle flight. So
Awesome.
there's some unbelievable, inspiring flights that people
Eh,
can do.
And where in North America are they doing stuff like that you're looking at going? Is it the Owens? Is it the stuff they're doing out in Nevada, Stan? Is it just
Yeah, the Owens Valley isn't. I mean, the Owens Valley is amazing conditions, but it tends to be like this north-south route that is
just
just you
out and
can go
backs?
extremely fast flights because and that's usually most of them are in wave. So you do in the Sierra Nevada wave, it is north-south yo-yo runs at exceptionally high speed. they don't interest me that much personally, because it's kind of flying in waves is once you figured out how to do it, it's kind of boring
Mm.
and cold. So I always freeze my feet off, and you just you know where to point it, and you just go straight, and they go straight all day long. They never circle,
Do you,
not once.
do you fly in sleeping bags and stuff? How high can you get and literally not turn into an ice cube in your plane when they're not pressurized? When does it start to just get beyond?
Dep-
uh,
Depends on the season. I mean, in the summer when we fly, we have to fly below class A most of the time, right? So there's very few places there are some places where you can get localized wave windows where you can climb higher,
Yep.
but most of the time we fly below 18,000.
Oh,
And
okay. So you're not
below
going, you're not
below
boosting to
18,000,
40s and stuff.
I mean, the Colorado state record is 45,000 feet, so
Wow.
that would freeze everything off.
Yeah.
But not many people do those high altitude flying is a very niche
Okay.
thing, and it's sort of and it's because it's kind of capped by the whether you have a pressurized cockpit or not. There are no new records to break really. The only
Mm,
way you break new records is with a Perlin glider,
okay.
right? So it's and if you don't break records, it's I mean, whether you climb to 30,000 feet or to 34,000 feet, it's just to me it doesn't do anything
I got
to
you.
me. It
Yeah.
doesn't do anything. What sort of would inspire me would be like a flight from across all the Rockies. Like if you could fly from, and there's a Kempton Izuno is the guy who proposed that flight. That would go from Boulder to the Pacific Ocean. That would be pretty amazing if you could fly in one day from Boulder, take off in Boulder, and land at in California at the coast, and do it in one day. That would be
What would
pretty
that,
big.
whoa, what would that
That would
route look like?
it would go well. It would first it would cross the Front Range. I would probably do it at the sort of northwest of Estes, and then fly along the Rabbit Ears Range, and then from there there's ridges north of the Moab area. If you go north of Moab,
Yeah.
where these mesa plateaus are,
Yeah.
you basically along these mesas into the high Uintas, and then along the Uintas, and then you cross into the western desert west of basically we're south a little bit, north of Nephi, south of Salt Lake City. Get out of that, don't get into the airspace there.
Yeah.
Towards Ely, Nevada, and
Okay.
then from there, um, if you can make it from there to the Owens Valley, and then
Up and over.
you're up and over. Yeah,
Whoa. See, that's the kind of stuff, even a short version of that is would be exceptionally rare for us because it's always west, and we just can't go against the wind. I mean, you get these,
right.
spring and fall, you get these rare days where
I don't know if that flight is doable, but it's an inspiring idea.
oh God, that'd be incredible. What a party
Yeah,
when you get there.
yeah.
Wow, that's amazing. I mean, I got to look at Klaus's flights. I had no idea he was doing that. I knew he was, I'd heard about these monster 1500K FAI triangles, 7 countries in a day type stuff
Hmm.
that would just be amazing, flying the Maritimes and the high Alps and just seeing it all in one day would be incredible. But I didn't know they were crossing the Med and wow, and to
I mean, that
Greece.
is unbelievably, it's amazing, right? That's absolutely
It's
amazing.
just I
But
didn't I had
there's
no
guys
idea
who've
that was
there's now
possible.
guys who've connected the Alps and the Pyrenees. And that is
Yeah.
another amazing thing, right? Where you fly the Alps, and then you basically make the jump over to the Pyrenees, and you fly the Pyrenees.
Ugh.
So,
See, this is the thing about, the sailplanes are so cool. It's just that, I hope people listening to this go, yeah, okay, now I really got to do this because, it's one of these things I've thought about I've always just thought, yeah, someday, like you said, when my landing gear is not as good, then I'll get into sailplanes. But, that's just got to be incredible.
well, you should come back to Boulder to your alma mater, and we'll go flying.
Let's do it. Let's do it.
Huh? How about that?
I'll take you up on that. Let's do it.
Yeah.
Clemens, thank you very much. What a joy, and this was a lot of fun, and I really appreciate your time. Thanks for sharing this with me, and good luck with racing and your speedy education there, and congratulations on the success you've already had.
Well, thank you. I mean, thanks for having me. This was a ton of fun. I'm gonna go back and listen to your past episodes because I go trail running. I need something to listen to. This is perfect.
Great. If you find the Cloud-Based Mayhem valuable, you can support it in a lot of different ways. You can give us a rating on iTunes or Stitcher, or however you get your podcast. That goes a long ways and helps spread the word. You can blog about it on your own website or share it on social media. You can talk about it on the way up to launch with your pilot friends. I know a lot of interesting conversations have happened that way. And of course, you can support us financially. This show does take a lot of time, a lot of editing, a lot of storage and music and all kinds of behind the scenes cost. So if you can support us financially, all we've ever asked for is $1 a show. And you can do that through a one-time donation through PayPal, or you can set up a subscription service that charges you for each show that comes out. We put a new show out every 2 weeks. So, for example, if you did $1 a show and every 2 weeks, it'd be about $25 a year. So way cheaper than a magazine subscription, and it makes all of this possible. I do not want to fund this show with advertising or sponsors. We get asked about that pretty frequently, but for a whole bunch of different reasons, which I've said many times on the show, I don't want to do that. I don't like having that stuff at the front of the show. And I also want you to know that these are authentic conversations with real people, and these are just our opinions, but our opinions are not being skewed by sponsors or advertising dollars. I think that's a pretty toxic business model. So I hope you dig that. You can support us. If you go to cloudbasedmayhem.com, you can find the places to support. You can do it through patreon.com/cloudbasedmayhem. If you want a recurring subscription, you can also do that directly through the website. We've tried to make it really easy, and that will give you access to all the bonus material, little video casts that we do, and extra little nuggets that we find in conversations that don't make it into the main show, but we feel like you should hear. We don't put any of that behind a paywall. If you can't afford to support us, then just let me know and I'll set you up with an account. Of course, that'll be lifetime, and hopefully you're being in a position someday to be able to support us. But you'll find all that on the website. All of you who have supported us or even joined our newsletter or bought Cloud-Based Mayhem merchandise, t-shirts or hats or anything, you should be all set up. You should have an account, and you should be able to access all that bonus material now. Thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate your support, and we'll see you on the next show. Thank you.